Kinsley never thought the two people who raised her could be the ones to destroy her. She was 32 years old, living in Phoenix, Arizona, working double shifts, saving every dollar, building something real. That apartment wasn't just four walls. It was 3 years of sacrifice. 3 years of skipping vacations, eating cheap, saying no to everything just to own something that was truly hers. And then one morning, she got a call from a stranger, a real estate agent. Calling to confirm the closing date, Kinsley's hands went cold. She asked the woman to repeat herself. The agent paused, confused, and said, "Ma'am, your parents signed everything 2 weeks ago." The room went silent. Her parents, her own mother and father, had sold her apartment, behind her back, without a single word, but what they didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that Kinsley's attorney had already been watching, and everything they had done was already on record. This story is about to get much darker. If you don't want to miss what happens next, subscribe now and hit that bell. Trust me, you'll want to be here for this. My name is Kinsley. I am 32 years old and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Before anything else, I need you to understand what was taken from me. That apartment wasn't just a place to sleep. It was 3 years of my life. 3 years of working double shifts at the hospital, skipping every vacation, every dinner out, every small thing my friends were enjoying. I said no to all of it, every single time. Because I had one goal: to own something that was completely, legally, undeniably mine, and I did it. At 29, I signed those papers myself. I cried in the parking lot after. Happy tears. The proudest moment of my life. Growing up, my parents were the kind of people who smiled at church and argued about money on the drive home. They loved me, I believe that. But love in our house always came with control. My dad made every financial decision like we were his employees, not his children. My mom called it keeping the peace. I moved out at 24 because I needed to breathe. They called it selfish. We stayed in contact. Sunday calls, holiday dinners, the kind of relationship that looks fine from the outside but always feels like walking on thin ice. I never fully trusted them with my private life, but I never thought I needed to protect myself from them. That was my first mistake. It was a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work when my phone rang, unknown number, local area code. The woman introduced herself as a real estate agent. She was calling to confirm the final walkthrough date for my apartment on West Camelback Road. I stood completely still in my kitchen. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "Can you repeat that?" She did. "Closing date, final walkthrough. Everything finalized 2 weeks ago." I asked who had authorized the sale. She paused just slightly and said, "Your parents." I had a power of attorney on file. My coffee cup was still in my hand. I don't remember putting it down, but somehow I was sitting on the kitchen floor, and the room was completely silent. I called my mother before I even stood up from that floor. She answered on the second ring, which she never does. Looking back, I think she was waiting for my call. "Mom." My voice was flat. "A real estate agent just called me about my apartment." 2 full seconds of silence. Then, "Kinsley, just calm down. Let your father explain." "Calm down, not what are you talking about? Not there must be a mistake." She went straight to calm down. That one phrase told me everything. There was no mix-up, no misunderstanding. This was planned, discussed, decided, and executed while I was working night shifts and trusting that my home was still my home. I hung up without another word. I drove to the Maricopa County Recorder's office, still in my scrubs. The clerk pulled up the record in under 3 minutes. There it was, my property, my address, transfer of ownership, completed and recorded. And attached to the file, a power of attorney document bearing my parents' names, their signatures, and a signature block that was supposed to be mine. I stared at that signature for a long time. It wasn't my handwriting, not even close. I photographed every single page, every stamp, every signature, every date. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had shifted inside me, something quiet, something cold. Something that felt less like heartbreak and more like a decision being made deep in my chest. I sat in that parking lot for almost an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there going through every conversation from the past few months, looking for signs I had missed, and they were all there. My dad casually asked about the apartment's square footage. My mom asked whether I had updated my insurance. A random question about whether I used a property manager. I had brushed it all off as small talk, normal parent curiosity. It wasn't a curiosity. It was research. They had planned this carefully, quietly, and they waited until the deal was completely done before I ever found out because they didn't want to explain themselves. They wanted to hand me something I couldn't undo. They didn't know me as well as they thought. I drove home, showered, sat at my kitchen table with a notepad. I wrote down everything, every date, every name, every detail that now looked completely different: the agent's name, the title company, the closing date, and most importantly, the signature on that power of attorney that was not mine, that kept coming back to me. Over and over, this wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just my parents making a decision they had no right to make. This was forgery. This was a fraud. This was a crime committed against me by the two people who were supposed to love me most. And right there at that kitchen table, something in me went completely still. I picked up my phone. I had one call to make. And after that, nothing would ever be the same. I drove to my parents' house the next morning. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want them to prepare. I wanted to see their faces the moment they realized I wasn't falling apart. I was standing at their door with everything I knew. My mother opened it. She looked surprised for just a second, then quickly rearranged her face into something soft and rehearsed. Kinsley, come in, let's talk like adults. Like adults, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. My father was already sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, completely calm, like a man who had already decided how this conversation was going to go. I sat down across from him. And I waited. My father leaned forward and looked me straight in the eyes. No apology, no hesitation, just a steady, matter-of-fact voice that made everything worse. We needed the money, Kinsley. And we knew you would say no, so we handled it. We handled it. Like my apartment was a family asset they had every right to liquidate. Like 3 years of my sacrifices meant nothing more than a number on a closing document. My mother nodded beside him, slowly, carefully, like his words were completely reasonable. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not from sadness, from the sheer clarity of finally seeing exactly who these two people were and realizing I had spent my whole life making excuses for them. I asked them directly, "Where is the money from the sale?" My father didn't flinch. He told me the apartment sold for $340,000, and then he explained, calmly and without any shame, that every dollar had already been used. Medical bills, credit card debt. A loan they had taken 3 years ago and never told me about, $340,000. Gone. Not a single cent set aside for me, not a conversation, not even a text message. I sat completely still. Because if I moved, if I let one emotion out, I was afraid of what would follow, so I stayed calm. I kept my face neutral. And I let them keep talking, because every word they said was making my case stronger. Then my mother did something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. She reached across the table, patted my hand gently, and told me I was overreacting, that I was being ungrateful, that they had sacrificed everything for me my entire childhood, and this was one time they needed help, and I should be grateful they had handled it quietly without dragging me into the stress of it. Grateful. She used that word. Grateful. I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at her face, completely sincere, completely convinced she had done nothing wrong, and I made a decision at that exact moment. I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed record on my phone. Whatever came next, I was keeping every single word. That evening I sat with everything spread across my kitchen table, the photos from the recorder's office, the power of attorney document, the closing paperwork. I went through every page slowly. And the more I looked, the worse it got. The power of attorney had been notarized, officially stamped and signed by a notary public in Scottsdale, which meant someone had physically presented that document with my forged signature, and a licensed notary had certified it as legitimate. This wasn't just my parents acting impulsively. Someone had helped them. This had layers. And the forged signature wasn't just a civil issue, it was a felony. Forgery in Arizona carried real criminal consequences. I photographed everything again. Organized every file. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 days, absolute clarity. I called the real estate agent back the next morning, politely, professionally, and asked a few careful questions. The buyer had already taken possession. Renovation permits had been filed with the city just 4 days after closing. Workers were already scheduled to begin demolition on the interior walls by the end of the week. My stomach dropped. Every day that passed made this harder to reverse. Every nail they put in that wall, every permit stamped, every contractor paid, it all created a paper trail that worked against me. I had maybe days, not weeks, before this became legally impossible to untangle. I put the phone down and sat very still. The window was closing, and I had one move left, one person who could stop all of it before it was too late. That night I called Daniel Mercer. Daniel was a real estate and fraud attorney based in Scottsdale. I had met him once at a work event 2 years earlier, exchanged cards, never followed up. I almost didn't call. I almost talked myself into believing maybe there was another way through this. But then I looked at that forged signature one more time. He answered on the third ring. I told him everything, start to finish, no pausing, no editing. The agent's call, the recorder's office, my parents' confession, the forged power of attorney, the notary stamp, the recording I had made. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then Daniel said, calm, steady, completely certain. Kinsley, they committed a felony, and we have everything we need to prove it. Daniel didn't waste a single word that night. He listened to everything I had told him, every detail, every date, every conversation, and when I finished, he was quiet for just a moment. Not the kind of quiet that means someone is unsure. The kind of quiet that means someone is already thinking 3 steps ahead. Then he said it, slow and clear. Kinsley, they broke the law, not this looks bad. not we might have a case. He said they broke the law like it was already a settled fact, like the outcome was just paperwork at this point. Something in my chest loosened for the first time in 3 days. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. What had been done to me had a name, and it was serious. Daniel explained everything in plain, clear language, which I appreciated more than he knew. Forging a power of attorney in Arizona is a Class 4 felony. It carries potential prison time. And using that forged document to complete a real estate transaction worth over $300,000 that added fraud charges on top of everything else, my parents hadn't just made a bad decision. They had committed crimes, multiple crimes, with documentation, with a paper trail that led directly back to them. And the notary who had stamped that document, Daniel, said that person had serious questions to answer too. Either they had been deceived or they had participated. Either way, that stamp was now part of a criminal investigation. I sat at my kitchen table listening to him and felt the entire situation shift beneath me. The very next morning, Daniel filed an emergency injunction. I didn't fully understand what that meant at first, so he explained it simply. An injunction was a court order that would immediately freeze any further action on the property. No more renovations, no more permits, no transfer of ownership to any third party. Everything stops, legally, officially, completely, until the court has a chance to examine what happened. The filing went in before 9 in the morning. By noon, Daniel called me to confirm it had been accepted by the court and a judge had signed off on the temporary order. I remember standing in the hospital break room when he told me, still in my scrubs, halfway through a 12-hour shift, and for the first time in days I actually exhaled. The clock had stopped. The window was no longer closing. While my parents had no idea anything legal had been set in motion, Daniel and I got to work. We spent the next several days organizing everything I had gathered. The photos from the recorder's office, the closing documents, the forged power of attorney with the notary stamp, the recordings from my parents' kitchen, my father's voice, calm and unapologetic, explaining exactly why they had done it. My mother called me ungrateful. Daniel also subpoenaed bank records, showing exactly where the $340,000 had gone and when. He requested the original notary log from the Scottsdale office. He pulled the title company's internal communications. Every piece fit together cleanly. This wasn't a complicated case, it was a clear one. And clear cases, Daniel told me, are the ones you win. My parents called 3 times that first week. I didn't answer once, then my mother sent a text. It said, "Kinsley, we hope you've had time to calm down and think clearly. We love you, let's move forward as a family." Move forward, as a family. I read that message twice. Then I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Daniel. He actually called me after he saw it and said, "This is helpful, keep saving everything they send you." My parents genuinely believed I had cried, processed it, and decided to let it go. That I had done the math, weighed the family drama against the fight, and chosen to stay quiet. They had underestimated me my entire life. They were doing it again right now. And honestly, I was glad, because the quieter they stayed, the cleaner our case got. Daniel contacted the buyer directly, a real estate investor based in Tempe who had purchased the apartment as a rental property. He informed him professionally and clearly that the sale had been executed using a forged power of attorney and that the transaction was now under court review. The investor had purchased a property he had no clean legal title to. Every dollar he had spent and every renovation he had started was now tied up in a fraudulent transaction. The investor's attorney called Daniel back within 2 hours. Furious didn't cover it. He had paid $340,000 in good faith, and now he was sitting on a property with a frozen title and a court order blocking his renovation crew. He wanted answers. And more importantly, he wanted his money back. From my parents. A week after that first call with Daniel, I sat across from him in his Scottsdale office, clean desk, quiet room, afternoon light coming through the blinds. He walked me through exactly where we stood, the injunction holding, the evidence organized, the buyer's attorney now cooperating fully, the criminal forgery referral being prepared for the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office. He asked me how I was doing. Not as a formality. He actually waited for the answer. I thought about it for a moment, and then I told him the truth. "I'm done crying," I said. "I just want to finish this." He nodded. No extra words, no reassurance speech. He just picked up his pen and got back to work. And sitting there across from him, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, like myself, strong, focused, ready. 3 weeks after my first call with Daniel, the fraud case was officially filed. I wasn't there when it happened. I was at work halfway through a morning shift when Daniel sent me a simple text. 2 words. Papers served. I stepped into the hallway and just stood there for a moment, staring at those 2 words on my screen. Something about seeing it confirmed, in writing, officially, legally, made it feel real in a way that nothing else had. My parents had been served at their front door by a process server. Court documents, official case number, a hearing date. Their names listed as defendants in a fraud and forgery case filed by their own daughter. Whatever they thought was going to happen, this was not it. My mother called me 14 times in 1 hour. I know because I counted them afterward, sitting in my car during my lunch break, watching the notifications stack up on my screen one after another. No voicemails at first, just calls, back to back. The kind of calling that isn't about reaching someone, it's about panic. Then the voicemails started. Her voice moved through every emotion in order, confused first, then hurt, then angry, then back to hurt again. The last one was quiet, almost a whisper. She said, "Kinsley, please. We're your parents, you don't do this to your family." I listened to every single one. Then I forwarded them all to Daniel, every voicemail, every missed call timestamp, more evidence, more documentation. More of their own words worked against them. Then came the relatives. My aunt called first, my mother's older sister, using that careful, gentle voice people use when they've been briefed on one side of a story and fully believe it. She told me my parents were devastated, that this was tearing the family apart, that I needed to think about what I was doing before I destroyed relationships I could never repair. Then my cousin, then my father's brother. One after another, like someone had passed around a phone list. None of them asked what had actually happened. None of them asked to see documents or hear my side. They had already decided I was the problem, that I was taking something too far. That family forgives and moves on. I listened to each one politely. And then I stopped answering those calls too. The first hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning in November. Daniel presented everything, organized, clear, and completely airtight. The original deed shows my sole ownership. The forged power of attorney with the signature that did not match any document bearing my actual handwriting. The notary records. The bank statements showing exactly where every dollar of the sale had gone. The title company communications. The recording from my parents' kitchen. The judge, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, reviewed each piece without expression. She asked Daniel 2 clarifying questions. Precise, technical questions that told me she had read everything carefully before walking into that room. I sat straight in my chair and watched her face. And I could tell, even before anyone spoke, that she understood exactly what had happened here. My father's attorney made one significant argument during that hearing. He claimed that Kinsley had given her parents verbal permission to act on her behalf regarding the property, that the power of attorney, while imperfectly executed, reflected a genuine family agreement that had simply not been properly documented. Verbal permission. That was their defense. Daniel let him finish. Then he turned to the judge, pulled out his phone, and played the recording from my parents' kitchen. My father's own voice, steady, unapologetic, completely clear, saying the exact words that destroyed his attorney's argument in real time. "We needed the money, and we knew you would say no, so we handled it." The courtroom went very quiet. My father's attorney stopped writing. My father stared at the table, and the judge looked up slowly from her notes. The judge set down her pen and addressed the courtroom directly. She said she had reviewed every document submitted by both parties. She said the signature discrepancy on the power of attorney was not subtle, it was significant and obvious. She said the audio recording confirmed that the defendants had knowingly acted without the plaintiff's consent and had deliberately chosen not to seek it. Then she used a word that made the entire room shift. Deliberate. She called the forgery deliberate. She said the evidence suggested this had not been an act of confusion or poor judgment. It had been a calculated decision made with full awareness of the consequences. I kept my eyes forward. My hands were folded on the table in front of me, completely still. I had waited a long time to hear someone in authority say out loud what I already knew. For the entire duration of that hearing, from the moment I walked into that courtroom to the moment I walked out, I never once looked at my parents. Not when they entered, not when their attorney spoke, not when my father's voice played through Daniel's phone filling the whole room, not even when I heard my mother make a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, after the judge used the word deliberate. I kept my eyes on the judge, on Daniel, on the documents in front of me, on the American flag standing in the corner of the room, because looking at them would have meant letting them into that moment. And that moment didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. I had earned every single second of it. The final hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in December. I wore the same blazer I had worn the day I signed my original closing papers 3 years ago. I don't know exactly why. It just felt right, like I was closing a circle that should never have been broken open in the first place. Daniel and I arrived early. We sat quietly. We didn't rehearse anything or run through last-minute details. Everything had already been said. Every document had already been submitted. The work was done, the judge entered. The room stood. She sat down, opened the file, and without any lengthy preamble, she began to read her ruling. I held my breath without realizing it. The judge voided the sale completely. Those 4 words landed in that courtroom like something physical. The sale, the closing, the transfer, the entire transaction my parents had constructed behind my back was declared legally null and void. The deed would be returned to my name immediately. No appeals process, no delays. Effective that day, then came the damages. My parents were ordered to pay my full legal fees, court costs, and financial damages for the period I had been unlawfully deprived of my property. Daniel had prepared a precise figure based on lost rental income, documented stress-related expenses, and legal costs. When the judge read the total number out loud, I heard someone behind me draw a sharp breath. I kept my face completely still, but inside, something enormous finally released. Before we even left the courthouse that morning, Daniel told me something I hadn't expected. The buyer's attorney had filed a separate civil suit against my parents the previous afternoon. The investor, the man who had paid $340,000 in good faith for a property he never had clean title to, was now suing my parents directly for the full purchase price plus damages plus his renovation costs. My parents had spent that money, all of it, which meant they now owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to two separate parties, me and the investor, with no obvious way to pay either one. They had thought they were solving a financial problem. Instead, they had created one so large it would follow them for years. Every single consequence they were now facing, they had built themselves. Daniel and I walked out of the Maricopa County Courthouse just after 11 in the morning. The December air was cool and clean. The kind of Phoenix winter morning that feels like the whole city just exhaled. We stood on the steps for a moment and he turned to me and extended his hand. I shook it. He said, "You handled every part of this exactly right. You stayed calm when it mattered. You documented everything. You trusted the process." I thanked him, genuinely, not just for the legal work, but for that first phone call when he told me clearly and without hesitation that what had been done to me was wrong. Sometimes that's the thing a person needs most. Just one voice saying, "You're right. This is not okay." I drove straight to the apartment after leaving the courthouse. I had a key, I had always had a key, but I hadn't been inside since before any of this started. The injunction had frozen the renovation work, so the interior was exactly as the buyer's crew had left it mid-process. Drop clothes on the floor, paint samples on one wall, a door frame half removed in the hallway. I stood in the entrance for a long time. It was a little rough around the edges, a little unsettled, but it was mine. Legally, officially, completely mine with a court order to prove it. I walked slowly through every room, ran my hand along the kitchen counter, stood at the window in the living room, just breathing, just being there, just letting it be real. Before I left the apartment that afternoon, I sat down on the floor of the empty living room and recorded a voice memo on my phone. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just pressed the record and talked. I talked about the Tuesday morning when the real estate agent called, about sitting on my kitchen floor, about driving to the recorder's office in my scrubs, about my father's face when he said we handled it like it was nothing, about 14 missed calls I never answered, about sitting in that courtroom and never once looking at them. And then I said the thing I most needed to hear myself say out loud. You didn't break. When it would have been so easy to fall apart, you didn't. And that matters more than any of this. I locked the apartment door behind me and stood for a moment in the hallway. The building was quiet. Late afternoon light came through the window at the end of the corridor, long and golden the way it only gets in December in Phoenix. It fell across the floor in a warm stripe, and I just stood there in it for a second. 3 years of sacrifice to get here. 90 days of the hardest fight of my life to get back. People always say blood is thicker than water. That family forgives. That you don't go to court against the people who raised you, but nobody tells you what to do when the people who raised you are the ones who need to be stopped. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and as the doors opened I whispered, just to myself, quietly and completely certain. This was always mine.